Arctic and Antarctic. We know they're cold and white, and there's one at each end of the world. But which is which? We think of them as similar. After all, they do have a lot in common. They are the ice worlds. Non-snow dwellers think of ice as cruel and heartless, the opposite of warmth and love. Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale tells how a shard of magical glass enters the heart of a sunny-natured little boy and turns it to ice. His frozen heart makes him indifferent and cruel. Kidnapped by the heartless Snow Queen, he forgets his family and goes to live in the Queen's magnificent ice palace. There he learns to prefer the chilly perfection of an ice crystal to the beauty of a living rose. Only the warm tears of a loving friend can melt the ice in his heart and restore him to his warm, lively self. Ice may be the enemy of life, but the polar ice world is full of strange and intricate beauty. Billions of snowflakes go to make up the feathered rain, but like human fingerprints, no two are alike. And depending on weather conditions, there really are different kinds of snow. As any winter sports enthusiast will tell you. Gradually, soft fallen snow compacts into hard ice. On the frozen land of both polar regions, this ice sheet slowly heads for the sea. There, chunks of solid ice break off and float away into the open ocean. Icebergs can be the size of Belgium. As they drift on the currents, wind and weather transform them into giant ice sculptures. They're like floating reservoirs. A medium-sized iceberg contains enough fresh water to supply a family of 5 for 100,000 years. These monster ice cubes, with only a tenth of their bulk visible above the sea's surface, make for dangerous encounters for the world's shipping. The polar regions lie at the top and bottom of the world. The frozen wastes of the northern Arctic are the home of the husky. While in the south, the Antarctic provides cold comfort for the penguin. If you follow your compass far enough north, it will suddenly start to race around in circles. But you'll be barking up the wrong pole. The compass takes you to the magnetic North Pole, but its location varies. The geographic pole, north of everywhere else in the world, stays firmly fixed. It's the Earth's magnetic field which gives us the biggest spectacle of the polar skies. In Inuit mythology, the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, are the torches of the spirits leading the souls of the dead to paradise. The tilt of the Earth's axis means that for half of the year, each pole points towards the sun, constant daylight, while for the other half, each is pointed away, constant night. But even 6 months of continuous daylight doesn't cut much ice in these frozen worlds. The sun is never overhead, so its rays are weaker than those hitting the rest of the globe. And even this feeble warmth is reflected back by the glittering ice. The Arctic tern, despite its name, refuses to endure the long Arctic night. After summering at the North Pole, it flies south to arrive at the South Pole in time for the Antarctic dawn. Basking in almost perpetual summer, this restless bird spends more of its life in daylight than any other creature on Earth. The tern knew what was at the ends of the Earth long before Europeans, who could only wonder. The ancient Greeks speculated that there were 2 unknown lands. They named the Arctic first, calling it after the Great Bear constellation Arctos in the northern skies. The land at the southern end was called the opposite, No Bear, the Antarctic. They imagined these lands to be warm and fertile. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Life at the ends of the Earth is hard. Although their homes are separated by thousands of miles, both the husky and the penguin face the same struggle for survival. But the polar regions are far from being mirror images of each other. They are quite literally poles apart. The husky's Arctic home is an ice-covered ocean, while the penguin's Antarctic habitat is a continent of land. Yet it's the Arctic which has a long history of human presence, as the husky knows. Each pole has its own unique wildlife. No species is found at both poles. There's only one non-human creature which visits both, the Arctic tern. As the Arctic sun rises, the terns are heading towards their breeding grounds near the North Pole. They aren't the only ones with spring fever. Visitors are arriving by land, air, and sea. Thousands of caribou and musk ox make their way along traditional migration paths towards the land of the midnight sun. Less predictable is the movement of the lemmings. They're a vital building block in the Arctic food structure. Just about everything wants to eat them. When lemming numbers are low, terns, Arctic foxes, and snowy owls all go hungry. The most plentiful visitors are the birds. With 24-hour daylight, they can feed almost continuously. Only 8 bird species live year-round in the Arctic. In the summer, they are joined by nearly 20 times as many vacationers. An ancient Inuit myth tells of a woman who accidentally startled a group of playing children. She gazed in horror as before her eyes they turned into birds and rose into the air. The children never returned, and to many Arctic peoples, the fluttering wings of birds are a reminder of the souls of lost children. The Arctic summer visitors have a packed schedule. They must travel, eat, breed, and bring up their young while the good weather lasts. They come north to take advantage of the spring bounty around the edges of the Arctic Circle. Arctic plants have to make the most of the short growing season. Plants here can photosynthesize at temperatures below freezing. As soon as there is daylight and the snow clears, more than 500 species of wildflowers burst into a glorious carpet of summer blooms. But this exuberant display is only skin deep. Less than a foot below the surface lies the permafrost, where the soil is frozen solid and remains so even through the summer. Early human visitors did not come for the splendor of the Arctic summer. 16th century Europeans were searching for a way through the Arctic, a shortcut from one continent to another. They never succeeded, but they did find other people, even in the most desolate regions. The visitors were amazed to find the Inuit warm, well-nourished, and quite at home. They had triumphed over their environment with a culture perfectly adapted to life on the ice. Arctic societies, such as the Siberian Evenki nomads, have shamans, people who can enter a trance state and visit a parallel reality. They fly to a spirit world where everything from snowflake to seal has an equal claim to respect. If humans learn this lesson, the animal spirits provide the game. But even with the spirits' cooperation, the hunters must cover a lot of ground to find game. For the Inuit, the problem of transportation was solved hundreds of years ago by the domestication of huskies. Dog teams are still the safest and most efficient means of crossing snow and ice. They don't break down or run out of gas, and they can avoid dangers. They sense thin ice and hidden crevices. Huskies are masters of Arctic survival. They can sleep outside in the strongest blizzard. The layers of snow just add to their insulation. Their dense fur comes in 2 layers, and even the insides of their ears are furry. Huskies are far from being pets. They're fierce and competitive working dogs. The Arctic Lapps use reindeer to pull their sleds. From this image, and that of the shaman flying through the air to the spirit world, comes our vision of Father Christmas, the North Pole's most famous resident. The postal services seem to have no difficulty with polar conditions. Each year, thousands of letters addressed to Santa Claus, North Pole, are delivered and receive replies. On the Arctic ice cap itself, close to the pole, there are few summer visitors. There is no food and little shelter. Only full-time residents can cope with such extremes. Fortunately, the ice cap is thin, so the sea, with its food supply and comparative warmth, is, like a convenience store, close at hand. In fact, some of the residents move into the store altogether. They only emerge now and again to breathe. The walrus in Lewis Carroll's Alice Through the Looking Glass was a more sprightly creature than the usual Arctic variety. Having invited the oysters to walk with him, he subsequently ate them, which is exactly what walruses do, along with huge quantities of other shellfish. Large meals are a strict necessity. The Arctic is no place for dieting. Walrus fat, 2,000 pounds of it, keeps out the cold of the freezing Arctic waters, but it slows things down a little on land. Polar bears know all the tricks for Arctic survival. They maintain a higher body temperature than a human, even in freezing conditions. The hairs of their fur are hollow and translucent. They act like mini greenhouses to trap warmth to their bodies. Polar bears are hunters of seals. They can easily cover 50 miles a day across the ice, and unlike most land mammals, polar bears are tireless swimmers. They can keep going for days. The outer hairs of their fur coat clump, making a watertight suit. Female polar bears dig dens in the snow, ice nests in which their cubs, weighing only 1/1000th of their adult weight, are born and suckled through a whole winter. The principle of the ice nest was borrowed by Inuit hunters needing shelter during hunting expeditions. Like the polar bear, they use the insulating properties of snow to keep the cold out and warmth in. And unlike a tent, the igloo stands up to the winds. It's frozen to the spot. Humans borrow other techniques from the animal residents. They copy the polar bear's trick, waiting by breathing holes for seals to emerge, and adopt their skins as protection from the bitter winds. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Arctic received a new set of human visitors. Their strange goal? An unmarked point on a featureless ice cap, identical to the miles of snow surrounding it. They were racing for the North Pole. Only accurate instrument measurements could tell them that they had arrived at their destination. Two Americans, Robert Peary and his competitor, Frederick Cook, both claimed victory, but it now seems unlikely that either of them reached the North Pole. Just a few years later, polar fever switched to the other end of the globe. This time, the race was between a Norwegian, Roald Amundsen, and an Englishman, Robert Falcon Scott, battling for the even more formidable South Pole. Amundsen followed traditional Inuit methods, bringing huskies from pole to pull his sleds. Scott's team decided to innovate. They took ponies and dressed in wool instead of furs. Scott's decision proved to be fatal. Medieval travelers believing in a flat Earth were afraid of falling off the southern edges of the world. Antarctic visitors often feel they've done exactly this, plunging into a white hole of howling, frozen fury. Distortion of the senses is well known in the white world of the Antarctic. Mirage-like illusions can seem extremely real. Scott's team were convinced that they saw St. Paul's Cathedral. The Antarctic is the coldest place on the planet. At minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, just about anything freezes. Here you need a refrigerator to keep your food warm. Yet despite the cold, Antarctica is a desert. Only a tiny amount of snow falls each year. Those fierce blizzards are all recycled. But snow has been building up here for centuries. Antarctica stores 3/4 of all the world's fresh water. It's the Earth's largest frozen asset. The Antarctic landmass, itself big enough to include the United States, is overlaid with an enormous dome of ice more than 2 miles deep. And as if this isn't enough, the whole thing doubles in size each winter as the surrounding sea freezes. The biggest seasonal change on the planet. Ringed by ice and cut off by dark, storm-ridden seas, Antarctica received few visitors. No one knew what kind of land lay behind this forbidding barrier. In the 19th century, Captain Cook had sailed around it, but he never actually saw it. though he did see quantities of whales and seals. Sailors were tempted south by these rich catches, eventually to the continent itself. The local wildlife turned out to greet the new arrivals. With no previous experience of humans, they were curious and trusting, and consequently often ended up as mariners' dish of the day. Animal visitors were way ahead of humans in finding Antarctica. It's the perfect place for fattening up. Tiny, almost invisible plankton and krill turn the sea into a nutritious soup. Whales come by the thousand to eat and eat and eat. And like the whale, the Arctic tern doubles its body weight during its summer visit. Having raised its chicks in the north, it's come south to stock up. But the albatross has come to breed. They nest in summer and stay right through the bitter Antarctic winter. There are no hasty marriages here. A 3 to 4 year courtship is the norm. Covered in a thick down overcoat, the chicks sit out the Antarctic winter. Once the chicks are raised, the adults take to the air. For years at a time, their feet won't touch the ground. Eventually, those giant wings will have covered the distance to the moon and back. This wandering bird was believed by sailors to bring the wind. In Coleridge's poem, the ancient mariner shoots an albatross, and the ship is instantly becalmed. Its crew perish, except for the ancient mariner, who is condemned to wander to the ends of his days, telling his sad story to everyone he meets. Surviving the icy waters of the Antarctic is a science. The blood of the ghostly ice fish acts like car antifreeze. So while all around it freezes, the ice fish stays in the swim. Those few superspecies which have cracked the icy Antarctic winters have little competition. Success breeds success. Weddell seals spend the winter underneath the ice. It's warmer and there's plenty to eat. To breathe, they gnaw holes. Continuous ice crunching plays havoc with their teeth. Toothache is part of the Weddell's life. Perhaps the Antarctic's most famous resident is the penguin. They may look like a cartoonist's invention, but they are, of course, a bird, just like the tern. A bird which waddles, swims, and, unlike the tern, has forgotten how to fly. The penguin's legs have shortened, and its small feet reduce heat loss. The tern still needs its long legs for taking off. The penguin spends a lot of time in cold water. It's become streamlined, covered in dense, overlapping feathers. The tern needs its tail and wings for flight, but the penguin's tail has become a rudder, and its wings powerful flippers. In the water, penguins come into their own. As the winter night approaches, most Antarctic life begins to move towards the comparative warmth of the sea. One creature, however, is heading in the opposite direction. The emperor penguin is trudging 100 miles across ice and snow to the world's coldest nursery. Once there, each pair produces a single egg, which keeps its father on his toes. In penguin families, it's the male who's left holding the baby. His feet may not be very big, but they're all that stands between the egg and the freezer. While the females hike back to the sea to feed, The males huddle together. As the dark winter closes in, only male bonding can ward off the cold. They stand virtually motionless with no food and only a mouthful of snow to drink for 3 long months. The females return for their own stint of babysitting just after the eggs have hatched. But how to find the right emperor? All penguins look alike, even to each other. But they don't sound alike. A searching parent just listens for the right note. And as the chicks mature, the emperor penguin families head out onto the ice floes. Their dark, freezing ordeal is over for another year. Although the two poles are so different, the handful of polar survivors share the same extraordinary qualities and a unique level of adaptation. Even though they're thousands of miles apart, could the husky and the penguin survive in each other's ice worlds? The polar races did what nature had not, and brought these two endurance champions together. For a brief time, they shared the Antarctic, and the huskies thrived, even though it was colder than anything they'd ever known in the north. However, in 1991, it was decided to ban all non-indigenous species from Antarctica, and the huskies went home to the Arctic, leaving the penguins to their own ice kingdom.